Glen, how are you doing on Capitol Hill down there?
Well, Marty, thank you very much for having me back once again. It's a cold, dreary day here in Washington, D.C., but if you have your view and my view, most days in Washington, D.C. are some form of dreary or the other, so I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, it would be good if they, just stayed out of Congress, didn't come back for a while, but... So what is actually going on here? What do you see with the civil war that we our computers warning about within the Republican Party for 2016?
Well, like most of the calls that you make, there is some there, and it's already really manifested itself. You might remember in the last Congress, there came to be sort of a Mexican standoff within the Republican Party. To get bills passed out of the House of Representatives, which is the one branch that Republicans controlled at that time, things pretty much had to be passed. All the procedural motions and votes and things had to be done with Republican votes. And what happened was, this is in the last Congress, about 30 Republicans on a good day and about 40 or so on a bad day were just more or less done with the Republican establishment, Republican leadership's way of doing things. So they couldn't get the votes needed to pass bills. So as we got deeper into the last Congress, what happened was we just didn't do very much. And truthfully, in fairness to the Republicans in the House, when you did do something, you sent it over to the Senate, and it just went and died. So not much sort of happened. Well, the plan for the Republican establishment here in Washington and on Wall Street and here in the House and now in the Senate was, okay, here's what we're going to do. We'll get back with a larger majority in the next Congress. All the polls were pointing towards a good Republican year, and that's what happened. We come back with a larger majority, and it'd be so big that we wouldn't have to worry about these internecine fights within the GOP. We could pass bills with this larger Republican majority even after losing the so-called crazies, the people that wanted to not spend money that you don't have and follow the Constitution and things like that, which in Washington, D.C. makes you sort of a crazy. Well, that was their plan. So, and they were going to stop listening to outside groups, these outside conservative groups, and Rush Limbaugh and the voices on talk radio. And so the very first vote happened to organize the House. The very first vote is to elect a Speaker of the House. And things started coming undone for their new game plan. Capitol Hill switchboards were flooded with calls, not from Democrats saying don't vote for John Boehner, but for Republican activists, the baseline kind of Republican voters. And each office has got hundreds and thousands of calls on this. And this very much surprised the Republican leadership, and by that I mean their staffs and the people around them, many of which are nice enough people and they're very bright people, but they don't talk to normal voters. They talk to lobbyists and pollsters, and they talk to each other, so they don't really understand how out of touch they are perceived to be with the voters out there. And when the dust settled in that Speaker's vote, about 24, or actually specifically 24 Republicans voted for somebody other than John Boehner for Speaker. Had that happened in the last Congress, he would have been denied his speakership. And just a few more votes this time, he would have been denied his speakership. So right away, they realized they've got something of a problem here. And so in the short few weeks that Congress has been in session since then, there have been a couple of big pieces of legislation that were going to be brought to the floor, passed basically with Republican votes, that had to be pulled because it turned out the Indians weren't following the chiefs. And so this is still a developing issue going forward, and as you well know, better than most, the last dealing with the debt ceiling, where the debt ceiling was suspended, where Mr. Boehner and a handful of Republicans got together with a large number of Democrats and just suspended the debt ceiling for a time certain. That time certain is coming up, and that's up in March. And so how that gets handled by the leadership may be very different than what rank and file Republicans in the House and the Senate are interested in seeing happen, and that could exacerbate some of those divisions and fractures within the Republican conference. So the Civil War, the reports of the demise or the death of the Republican Civil War after this big Republican showing in November are greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, I mean, everything that I'm just looking at from markets on a global scale and our models on the domestic side is just not really looking very good. So it certainly still appears as though we're headed towards this serious fracture in 16, and which is going to come about a year after the economic confidence model turns down. So that's like a lifetime in economics and politics. That's plenty of time to get everybody riled up. And I think we're going to see a significant break there because Bonner and the old country club Republican idea, I think is dead. I think that's the old generation.
May I ask you? I like your analysis based upon the cycles work that you do and the observations that you do about human psychology and how they manifest themselves in cycles and somewhat predictable patterns that allow you to make these calls. Is the political fractures and fissures that we're seeing now, are they as a result of this unraveling economic story, or are they resulting from the same things that caused the economy to begin, people to lose the confidence in the economy, are simultaneously causing them to lose confidence in their political leadership?
I think it's both. I mean, because it's once you have more or less the economy turned down, that is when you get all sorts of political change. This is one of the things I was warning about, like 1933. It's whoever is in power is basically thrown out. So 33, you had FDR come in, you had Adolf Hitler come in, and you had Mao come in. So it's not a particular a philosophy that I would say dominates. It's whatever's in motion at that time is thrown out and the motion's changed. And I find it interesting. It's like politically, it's almost deja vu. I mean, here we have the Republicans are back at levels when? At 1928. So it's almost as if we have completed the cycle. The revolution of the Wheel of Fortune has come. We've now reached the peak, which is exactly where we were when everything broke before. So I find that very interesting. That we have basically come up and made almost a double top, so to speak, in market terms, from a political standpoint, and we're going to turn down. I mean, it's interesting that each one of these waves. I mean, sometimes people go, "Oh, I don't know if you're going to be right or what." It's largely because you're seeing the boom at that time. This wave. It's like I get a lot of people going, Marty, I think you're really right. I could smell it coming. I mean, you drive down the street and every office building has got signs out, space available. You didn't see this at the peaks before, 07, 98, et cetera. I mean, everything's booming. So you can see it's more like of a dead cat bounce. I mean, and we're the best in the world. I mean, everywhere else is in economic decline, from China to Russia. Europe is in serious risk of completely seeing a fracture. I mean, Draghi didn't even, this stimulus thing, he didn't even actually have a formal vote on it because he did want to show the rift between North and South. So, I mean, we have serious problems absolutely everywhere. And unfortunately, the politicians like Boehner, et cetera, they don't see this coming. They just want to hold on to power. Whatever it is that they need to do, they're going to do. And this is really serious. So I'm not sure if they're going to, how this really unfolds. If we have to look at history, it's basically, it's not going to look very pretty. The Republican Party will split. There'll be a major fracture there, and you have a lot of people that will turn back towards some sort of fiscal conservatism. That I think it's largely the social issues are the ones that get all the attention, but I think honestly, if you take the elites of the Democrats and the elites of the Republicans, besides gay marriage and abortion, is there really any difference? I don't see it.
Well, to your point, in the lame duck session of Congress, the session that was held after the last election, we caught in to do some budgetary and appropriation housekeeping work, amongst other things, the one where the so-called Cromnibus bill was passed. There was a lot of legislating done that was sub rosa, that was done with the approval of the leadership of both parties and with the White House. It was very consequential. A couple of things in that Cromnibus bill, the so-called continuing resolution and omnibus bill, they merged it together and nicknamed it Cromnibus. There was famously some of the parts of the Dodd-Frank bill, which regulated in the aftermath of the financial crisis, was passed to do all sorts of things. One of the things it did was to say to limit prop trading on behalf of these too big to fail banks, and that was undone as part of the spending bill, and that was undone with the sufferance of all the powers that be around here. And then a second thing that reinforces your view there was that there was a very, very quietly, on a voice vote, on the so-called suspension calendar, there was a bill passed that dealt with effectively the matter in which bankruptcy for financial institutions over a certain size would be happening. So the pieces are being put in place, as you pointed out before, for bail-ins, for handling this crisis. But I don't think the average rank and file member around here knows it, and it's happening right in front of their nose. But they're so tuned into other things. It's the real elites in both parties that get together and conspire, if you will, to put these pieces on the chessboard in place, so that when the game is on, that's when people sort of realize, oh my gosh, I was a part of doing a lot of these things. But they don't know it because they just were. It's like misdirection in a magic show. Their attention, their gaze was averted elsewhere.
Well, when I had written, I guess last year or a year before, I forget, with that that supposed $10,000 limit came down to $3,000 for tracking anybody moving money, and I got a call from one friend on Capitol Hill, and he said, "Oh no, that I was mistaken. They never voted on such a thing." I said, "Really?" I said, "It was in the Patriot Act." "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I gave him the page number. And he goes, "Oh, my God, I didn't know that was in there." I said, "Yeah, it's now down to $3,000. And as of January 1st, you try to go to a bank and take out $3,000 in cash, watch what happens." And so it's no longer wiring money or even taking money out of the country. Just try and take $3,000 in cash out of your bank account. It's yours. You've already paid taxes. Watch what happens. But
well, you'll be accused of supporting the terrorist. That's
yeah, who knows? I mean, it's getting to the point where all of this stuff is just absolutely insane, and I wasn't really thrilled with Caco's bill putting in here that turning the TSA at least 50% of their time should be spent on investigating criminally anybody accused of something. So people don't realize that they can be accused of not paying taxes or whatever and not even notified. Then you try to go on vacation to Italy, and you'll be arrested. So it's more or less like the Berlin Wall coming down. I think that is the biggest incentive I've ever seen to leave the country and don't come back, because you just don't know what anybody can accuse you of absolutely anything, and then you can't leave the country.
Well, it's very chilling, and any one of these things would be very disturbing, but the summation of them starts to paint a picture, and it's not a very pretty one.
Yeah, and I don't know who's basically, it seems as though somebody's pulling the strings behind all of this, and I'm not even sure the people that are putting in the bills are even aware of what's going on. But, it certainly does appear as if somebody knows that we have a major financial crisis coming on, and they're just trying to grab every penny they possibly can from every possible source.
Well, I myself went to a lunch a few years ago, and Alan Greenspan was the speaker. And this was not it wasn't 3 people, but this was not some giant room full of people, and it was closed, and it was off the record. And I guess a certain amount of time's passed, so I can talk a little bit about what went on there. But Greenspan, who before would have, obviously the news media hung on his every word, and now he's, by this point in time, Bernanke's in. This is the pre-Yellen days. And Greenspan flatly said to this group of people I was with that he had had discussions with a very senior member of the Obama administration, and the implication was, he did not say Larry Summers, but that was the strong implication of the way that he phrased it, that he and Larry Summers had gotten together, and they both agreed that the highest probability event, taking a look at the course we were on and the lack of political will or desire by anybody to alter the course, that the highest probability event was crisis. Now, if he had said that, when he was in office and in any kind of a public forum, the world would have, gesticulated and bled to death right then. But he just said it as a flat matter of fact. I did have a chance to ask him. I asked him to what extent would he concede that the Federal Reserve had some culpability in that by accommodating political figures over time and their the fiscal policies that he was decrying at the time. And he kind of pulled the Greenspan, and he sort of filibustered me, and he said a lot of things, but he didn't answer the question, and then moved on. But I myself flatly heard from the mouth of the immediate past head of the Federal Reserve that he was predicting crisis. But once warned, twice shy.
Well, that's what I get from just about every one of my sources from Europe to Asia. They all seem to be looking at the same problem, but nobody will do anything.
To say, because you're a modest guy and you don't like to say too flattering about yourself, but I know for a fact that you know and talk regularly with Alan Greenspan-ish characters all around the world, and people who appreciate the fact that you say some things directly that they might agree with, but they don't dare say them for their own reasons. It's kind of like Mr. Greenspan there, who never would have said it in a public place while he was the Fed chairman, and as soon as he's out in a private place, he just said, essentially, get ready, in the fullness of time, the sky is falling. And I know that you talk to people like that all around the world, and that's the story you're getting from them.
Yeah, I can talk to them because they also know I will not use their name. But at the same time, a lot of people know that I talk to a lot of these types of people, so they want to know what we have coming out. So it's a very interesting issue that we have over the years. I mean, we've had, central banks actually deliberately leaking stuff to us because they couldn't do it to the press. So here, you get this out, please, because they know a lot of the major, institutions basically read us. So it's what I write about, this being politically correct problem. It ends up making it look like I'm the only guy saying stuff, but it's coming from a lot of sources. So.
Well, can you? We're now here firmly into 2015, and everybody that is listening to this conversation is well aware of your work, well aware of the importance of September or so of 2015 as a turn point in your economic confidence model. And you write a lot about this, obviously, but can you just articulate for a moment what your best guess is the way this turn in economic confidence is going to manifest itself? What's going to be when the things? I know things are fraying at the edges, but when the big bang actually happens, what's the beginning of that going to look like?
Well, I think
we're
already in it fairly aggressively now. We're seeing it at the peripheral, from Greece and Europe, etc. You have China, fooling around with its interest rates because it's got a credit crisis. You've got Putin trying to divide and conquer and get Europe and saying, hey, listen, you want your economy to help join us instead of the U.S. It's all over the place. And I think that, as I say, the political elections are 16, so that gives us about a year after this thing starts to turn down. And my deepest concern is that the United States is the only thing holding up the world economy at this point. Every economy is heading down. And that's going to, this is why the dollar is being pushed up. You have, against Canadian, everything. And at this point, as long as the U.S. stock market per se just kind of still, kind of chops around going sideways, we don't get some major thrust to the upside for September, and we stay, pretty much, hopefully below 18.5 on the Dow, then you'll get the initial correction. Everybody will get faked out. They'll say, okay, fine, see, the stock market's really going to crash. Here we go. And then that will be the buying opportunity, and most likely it will take off to the upside going into 17. If that happens, that's where we'll probably get the phase transition, and in order to create that, it means that the capital's got to flee the bond markets. So that's what creates these booms. It's a concentration of capital. So if capital is evenly dispersed, then you're not going to see a big spike, rally, or crash in anything. So it has to concentrate, and right now it's concentrated in the debt markets. So everybody's sitting there with cash, historic lows as far as retail participation in the stock market. Liquidity still at 50% of the level. This is not indicative of a major peak in the stock market. It's a major peak in bond markets where everybody's just sitting on money because they don't know what to do. And they're not collecting very much, interest, and now you have people starting to hoard cash. So I think that's largely what we're looking at, and it's going to be a wild time. So I think the turn in September is going to be more felt in the bond markets. And then as the stock market goes up, the Fed is, to be politically correct, they're going to have to raise interest rates because they're going to be seen as, if they don't do that, they have created a bubble, and that's what the traditional press will accuse them of. So they'll have to raise interest rates just to save face. The more they raise interest rates, the higher the dollar will go. So, it's a vicious cycle, but, the economics theories driving it have never changed, and that's the problem. So it's going to be a very interesting time.
was very interesting. You know, the Fed itself, or at least elements of the Fed's a big thing, and obviously there are reserve banks and there are armies of these economists that write lots of different things. So you can find a lot of different publications that use a lot of things. But there's a few years ago, a couple of guys at the New York Fed wrote an interesting piece speculating about the impact of if we sort of moved into negative interest rates, where and the Fed's still paying interest on excess reserves, so a lot of money's parked at the Fed. But if you essentially start charging banks, as Europe has been started doing, charging banks to keep reserves at the Fed rather than paying them to keep reserves at the Fed, then that ends up having negative interest rates bleed through to other sectors of society, which you're starting to see in other parts of the world right now. And some of the really perverse reactions as people and the things that some of the things that firms and very wealthy individuals might do in order to cope in a negative interest rate environment. And so it's very interesting that policy, somebody out there is thinking about that, but the typical policymaker here on Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C. is just blissfully unaware of how one thing, like the flapping butterfly wing, on one side of the world ends up causing a chain reaction of things that causes earthquake on the other side of the world, and no one sees what causes one thing. And that's what your work is so valuable doing. You spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of mental energy into modeling some of these things, and it's a little bit of a black box model to outsiders, but you're trying to capture all these various variables so that you're not ruled by emotion and not ruled by the heat of the moment, but you're trying to just take it all in sort of a mathematically predictable kind of way, and that's a great benefit for those of us that are really relying upon the work that you're doing and the models that you're putting together, you and your team.
Well, thank you. It is the only way to deal with this, because no individual can possibly look at all the variables that are actually going on. I mean, but unfortunately, when something happens, they always want to reduce it to one thing. It did this because of that, and it's a combination of things. So, well, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you much for having me back, and I look forward to chatting again and continuing to touch base on the whole range of matters that are all confronting all of us as we speed towards this rendezvous with destiny that we have later this year.
Well, I think it's very important for people to hear from you what's actually happening on Capitol Hill rather than some third party just trying to say, oh, this is what they're talking about. So thanks a lot for joining us, Glen.
Great. Thank you.